Welcome to the Pushing Beauty podcast. This is Michelle Diavella, and these are words from my soul. I woke up this morning knowing that I wanted to do a podcast, but I didn't know exactly what I was going to speak about. I have a lot of topics and different ideas that I want to share with you guys. But just before I was about to come on, I was thinking about what my night was like last night, and I had decided to do a little bit of yoga, and I put some music on. I was listening to some music to kind of have in mind for my breathwork workshop that I'm doing tonight. And as I was practicing, one song came on that just started to really trigger some deep emotions, and I think obviously moving my body was doing that as well. And I just found myself sobbing on my yoga mat, and a lot of waves of grief were coming up and releasing around my last breakup. And so today, when I was reflecting on last night, I suddenly thought, like, oh, let me look at the calendar. What was the date yesterday? And I realized that yesterday was a year ago that the relationship ended, actually the day after. So a year ago yesterday, when I was on my yoga mat crying, a year before that, I was in the airport at LAX crying on a seat in front of a bunch of strangers and really not caring at all, just tears streaming down my face as I waited for my flight. And I've never really been like that before in my life. You know, I've always been somebody who's felt deeply, but I've been able to really manage my emotions and, you know, wait till I'm at home or in private to express my sadness or my pain, which I think is a shame in and of itself, you know, that we feel that we have to mourn in private. But I didn't care because I just had no energy to care. I had no energy to put into worrying about what anybody thought of me. So I thought I would talk a little bit today about grief and how grief shows up. And I don't really know where it's going to go, but I'll just start. So without giving too many details about my breakup, it was a blindsiding breakup. I had no idea it was coming. I'm not sure if he knew it was coming, but he was the one who was dissatisfied. And it was, there was no warning whatsoever. And really, I don't think that I've ever been so blindsided in my life. So a lot of it, for me in the beginning was shock. And I remember, he left. It happened like on a Friday afternoon, like, I don't know, noon or something. And I have no idea how long we were talking for, but, he left and I had no idea what to do with myself. It was still daylight. I had plans to be working on a project all day that obviously just fell out the window. And I decided I needed to get in the shower because I didn't know what else to do with myself. And I got in the shower and I was just sobbing. And I suddenly found myself just crouched on the tub floor crying and realized that I was just numb. I couldn't feel anything. And I turned the water, I think, to cold or colder. And I got out of the shower and wrapped my hair in a towel, went and got my laptop, brought it back into the bathroom. My bathroom is kind of dark. There's like this one little window that, I don't know, it's like that weird glass that's kind of like crinkly. And so it's like not a lot of light comes in. So it was like the darkest room in my apartment. And I closed the door and I crouched down and had my back against the tub, and my feet against the wall, hair wrapped in a towel. And I started to write about my feelings and my experience. Is just what felt most natural to me, to just write about the pain I was experiencing and the surrealism of it. the way that my mind was kind of watching and processing, and the way that my heart was just felt shattered and broken. And how difficult it was for my mind to understand what was happening. From one perspective, it was like, okay, this is what's happening. You're going to be fine. This is for the best. And then from another perspective, it was like, what the hell is going on? This makes no sense whatsoever. Nothing is safe. Warning bells going off. And then there was this other part of me that was just grieving, just completely broken. And so all of this stuff is happening, in your system at one time. And as I was in the process of that, my brother calls me and he's like, "Are you just waking up?" And I'm like, "No, we just broke up." And I'm, crying and telling him. And he's like, like, come out to, he lives in Williamsburg in Brooklyn. And so he's like, come out and stay with me for a couple days. So I booked a flight and left the next morning. And that's when I was in the airport, just, crying on the plane, crying at dinner, crying in the car, crying in the bathroom, crying, it was just literally felt like tears just leaking from my eyeballs constantly. And it's really interesting to be in that process because it really is the body needing to purge. It was like the feeling that I had at that time was just, I felt so heartbroken, so completely just shattered that my body needed to release it somehow. And sometimes it would be sobs and it would be, connected to that feeling of grief. And sometimes it would just be like leaking, like my body was like, okay, these tears need to come out because this pain needs to purge. We can't hold on to all of this. And so it was a really interesting process of experiencing a depth of grief that I've never experienced in my life. I've experienced deep heartbreak before. I've been in other relationships that hadn't worked out, and there was a great sadness to it, and I'd experienced maybe a depression as well, but nothing like this. I think that when things happen suddenly, when you lose someone in your life, whether it's death or an ending of some kind, whatever way it is, it feels just like a shock to the system, and that shock is a big part of the grief, where you're trying to reorient yourself to a completely new life. So the relationship that I was in, we had been talking about moving in together, and it was a serious relationship, and suddenly none of that was happening. And suddenly he went from being my best friend and being a part of my day-to-day life to suddenly not existing at all. And for me, it did feel like a death. It felt like, there was no real closure. There was no ongoing communication. And I was left to try to pick up the pieces of my life myself. In doing that, it was a really important time in my life for me to rely on myself. And of course, in the beginning, I reached out to the people in my life over and over and over again because I was kind of such a mess. But then there was a certain point, and I have a memory of when it was, I would just call my mom all the time. Like sometimes I would call her and she would hear nothing, and then she would hear me crying. And I just didn't know what to do with myself at the time. And, I also want to preface, like, I'm going into the details of grief because I think it's really important. I think that we don't acknowledge grief enough. I'm actually in a writer's group I just recently joined, and I'm actually writing a book about my grief and my healing process. And so I was reading some pages of the book, and this woman said to me, a lot of the people also in the group have been through grief of their own and have written about it and expressed it. And she was saying, when you write about grief, you're expressing a very particular lens through which, an experience through which you're viewing the world. Your experience of the world is very, very, very different from the other experiences that we have in life when you're grieving. And that's been sitting with me for the past couple days. It's so true because I'm a year out, and while there's still stuff, like I was saying last night, I was purging some stuff, I'm not in the grief anymore. And it feels like, in one way it's deeply a part of me still, that experience, and I'm sure it will always be a part of me, but I'm not in it the way that I was. So I'm not experiencing the grief on a daily basis anymore. And so now, I work with people who are going through breakups, and I have so much compassion for them. But when you're actually in it, there's obviously there's empathy when you've been in it and then you're out of it. But when you're actually in it, it's so specific. It's so like tangible. It can really take over your life. And you have to, in my experience, you have to really allow yourself to process it and to be with it and to allow it to kind of swallow you whole in order to come out the other side of it. Going back to the experiences I had, the fight that I had on a daily basis of, I don't want to be here. I don't want this to be my life. I don't want to feel this way. That fight exhausted me. And the part where I was saying of allowing it to swallow you whole, when I would allow myself to surrender to the grief, there was so much relief in it because I just needed to purge. I just needed to allow myself to acknowledge where I really was and not to try to be somewhere else. And through that, I really was able to learn so much more about myself, about the human experience, and come out the other side just a completely, I think, more sensitive person, more compassionate person. I feel softer. I feel more connected to myself, more connected to humanity. And it kind of feels like, when you've been on a journey, you've been somewhere really dark, that you're wiser and you feel more whole. So when I was first going through it, I like I had said, I went to the East Coast and spent some time with my family. And then when I came back to LA, I had a moment of connecting with my ex, and there was a lot of confusion because there was a lot of dialogue around wanting to be together, on both parts. And so I felt that was going to happen, and then it didn't. So then there was this, it was almost like a second ending, right? Like two Band-Aids being ripped off. It was horrible. And that was probably the biggest, falling into the biggest hole for me, because it was like really, really done. I think in the beginning it was shock and grief and pain, but it was like, oh, this can't really be, this doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really fit with what's been happening, what my experience has been. But then, once things kind of got flushed out and the final conversation was had, it was like really over. And when you're in that finality, I don't know if that's a word, finality? I don't know. There's nobody here to correct me, so we'll just go with that. But when it's really final, it feels, that's where the death feeling comes in, and you really are mourning the loss. You're mourning the loss of a relationship, but also a loss of a future that you thought that you were going to have, right? Which is also really interesting because that doesn't exist. So this idea that you had for your future, it never existed. It was a figment of your imagination. And so you mourn the loss of something that never happened, but that's something that feels really tangible. It's something that feels, that you had excitement and hopes and dreams and just so much invested in the future with this particular person and everything that you were going to have and share together, and then it's not going to come to life, and there's great disappointment that comes with that. So after that had happened, I fell in a really major depression. I didn't sleep for 40 hours, which is totally not like me. I love my sleep. but literally could not sleep. And I think I was like a crazy person the first night, just rummaging through my whole apartment, looking for every piece of anything that I sent him home with a bunch of things that were his, but I was like, I need to find everything. His toothbrush, there was a sock, there was, kimchi in the fridge, all the photos and the cards and everything. I put everything in a bag. It was like my mission that night. Like I had to find every last thing because I couldn't bear going through the feeling in the future of grieving and then seeing something of his or coming across something of his. I just knew it would be too difficult. And of course that ends up happening anyway. You can't get everything when you're sharing your life with somebody. There's pieces that get all mixed up. And so I didn't sleep for like 40 hours. I could not eat. I literally had no appetite. And I was doing a lot of researching on how the brain is affected during grief and heartbreak and what happens to the body. And there's a lot of really interesting information, which I'm not going to be able to really say too much about because I don't remember it like factually, but I do know that that the heart actually does weaken, and I could feel like, it really felt like I had a weak heart, like there was an aching in my chest. And I had no appetite. I also love food, could not eat anything. Just really quickly felt like I was sort of withering away. And I spent a lot of time in bed, just crying and fighting my grief. Like, okay, I want to do something. I don't want to allow this grief to just overcome me. I want to learn from this and understand my experience. And so understand not just my experience, but understand what happened, how can I grow from this experience? I don't want this to happen again. I don't want to get in another relationship where the person just pieces out, or I'm not seeing things about myself that, I should really be seeing. And so I spent a lot of time talking to really close girlfriends and some guy friends, and just really looking at myself, really willing to see the truth and look at myself. And I think it's a really important thing to do. I learned a lot about myself without him telling me really hardly anything. I was able to see the truth about things about me that could be better, that I need to work on with myself. And then also acknowledge that even though I have places to work, we all have things to work on, and acknowledge to myself that I still didn't deserve to be left in that way. And I still deserve love. There's somebody out there that will love me without me being a perfect human being, and who will be willing to work through things with me. And so that's a really, really important piece to pick up on and to really embody and understand, because we can very easily, especially in breakups like this, get really hard on ourselves and think that we did everything wrong, and start shaming ourselves and guilt tripping ourselves and, wishing we had done everything differently. The truth is that we're human beings, and we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to be perfect partners. We try and we do the best we can. And, we need to match ourselves with partners who are able to acknowledge that we're doing the best that we can, and who are willing to be in it with us and kind of point out the things that maybe are not totally working or are triggering something within that person. And that's really, I think, the role of being in a conscious, healthy relationship. It's that you're willing to be in it together, and you're willing to acknowledge. I was talking to a girlfriend the other night, and she was talking about her husband and saying, there's things that annoy her. And then she realizes, when she drops his ego, who he is, at the core, she completely loves him. And when she focuses on his essence, his soul, like the heart that wants to come through, the things that irk her about him, or that are triggering her, they totally drop away, because she sees really where he's coming from. And, I think that when you're grieving, it can feel really challenging to love yourself And that's really the way that we get through it. So I was depressed for a really long time. I fell into a really, really, really bad depression. And I was having a really hard time getting out of it and finding any type of drive for my life, any type of appreciation for my life. I just felt completely hopeless and like nothing mattered. And to me, that I knew that was a red flag. It's almost like you're watching your experience and wishing to feel something positive, but there's nothing there at all. And then the fact that there's nothing there sinks you even deeper. And so what I realized was the more I was assessing myself and making a problem out of the fact that I was depressed, the deeper I was falling into a depression. And I think, eventually I started to find my way coming out of it. And it was very difficult for me to understand how I was coming out of it. And a couple, maybe months later, I was dipping in and out of depressions then after the big one. And I was listening to an Abraham Hicks YouTube audio. And they were talking about, there was a guy who was talking about that he was in a really bad depression, and they were like, well, how did you come out of it? And he's like, I don't know. And so they were like, well, this is how you come out of it. And they basically told him, and he's like, that's how I came out of it. And then at the same time, when I was listening to it, I was like, oh my God, that's how I came out of it. I think that when you're in the process of it happening, it's really hard to see it, but hearing it helped me acknowledge. And then I was able to recognize, oh, this is what I need to do moving forward. So the thing is that you don't really do anything. You don't fight it. You don't fight against yourself. You don't create more suffering. So when you're acknowledging, I'm grieving, I'm depressed, I feel horrible, and that's what you're focused on, the energy behind that is that that's a problem, that it's bad, that it's wrong, that something needs to be different. It's not okay for you to be grieving right now. When you release that, you allow yourself to just grieve. I would hold myself and just cry on my bed and just let myself cry and cry and cry and feel all of the pain. And I would find my arms just unconsciously wrapped around my chest like I was hugging myself. And then I would say, I love you. It's okay. You're fine. You're all right. Everything's going to be okay. And I would be really gentle with myself. And that's exactly what Abraham was saying. They were saying, I love you. It's okay. I'm here. Let's make some tea. Let's chill out. Let's just relax. Let's sleep a lot. It's really about just taking care of yourself, treating yourself the way that you would if you were a little child that you were caring for. You would never tell, the 5-year-old version of yourself, like, snap out of it. What's wrong with you? You shouldn't be feeling this way. You would be hugging her or him, and you would be, rubbing their hair and telling them everything's fine and just rest here, just relax, don't worry about anything, just cry, just let it out. You would be comforting yourself. And that's actually what you need to do when you're grieving. You need to continue to show up for yourself. You need to continue to love yourself, to honor yourself, and to allow yourself to be in the depths of the darkness if that's where you need to be. So much of the pain I experienced that this past year was from my fighting myself. It feels really crappy to grieve. It feels really, really crappy to feel depressed. It feels horrible to I was at the laundromat one day and just sit there feeling totally numb and not caring about anything. It feels horrible. And so we don't want to feel that way. So we fight it and we try to, claw our way to feeling good, and you can't get there that way. In my experience, you have to completely surrender to the feeling, to the pain, and be in it and allow it and have compassion. Have compassion for yourself. So I think I was talking in the beginning about how I was calling my mom and had this moment of realizing that I needed to be there for myself. And, in the very beginning, after he left for the second time, so when it was like really done, I really was in so much shock and just, also probably like delusional from not sleeping and not eating and just really being a mess and probably obsessively thinking about it and talking about it. I was just constantly talking to friends for hours. There were, a couple people in particular. And like I was saying before, there's a good part of it where you are able to, when you're willing, to see so much of yourself that you maybe wouldn't have been willing to see before. But then you get to a point where you're just talking about the same thing. And some of that is because of the shock. Your mind is trying to understand it and process it, and that's fine. It's okay, to be in that place. I feel it is. I think when we try to push ourselves beyond what we're ready for, we don't really heal fully. So I think you need to be there for a while. I had many, many hours of conversations, just trying to understand it or having a new insight about myself or about the dynamic. And I did that for a long time. And then, I would wait. Mornings were really, really hard for me. For some people, it's nighttime, there were periods of time when it was morning, afternoon and night. But the mornings were always really, really hard. Evenings were also hard, like falling asleep, and I had a really difficult time sleeping every time I would wake up. I was like terrified to wake up and remember what my life now had become. And I'd, wake up and kind of be crying, or I'd wake up and just reach out to my phone to see if he had messaged me, even though I knew he wasn't going to. It was this kind of weird, unconscious, like longing. And waking up just already crying before I really realized why I was crying. So this really interesting thing where like the body and our spirit, I think, our soul knows that there's, a big fracture. And so I was doing that for a while. And one morning, most mornings I would wake up and I would just be like, I have no idea what to do. I have no desire to get out of bed. Knowing that I needed to, I run my own business, so I don't have a job that I go to. So kind of a blessing and a curse. I think it allowed me to really grieve and go deep, but also was really hard for me to be self-motivated to do anything. So I was just like laying in bed a lot in the mornings and just crying. And some mornings I needed to call my mom to tell me like what to do. Like I just didn't know how to move on with my life or what to do that morning, or I just had no desire to do anything. And so I would call her. And one time it just felt so bad that I just asked her, like, I'll pay for your flight. I'll pay for your time off of work. Like, will you just come out here and be with me? And I know this was heartbreaking for her, but she just said, that's not going to help you. And, of course I love you and I would, and I will, and, all of that kind of stuff. But, you're at the point where you need to find within yourself, like you need to heal within yourself. She said it much more beautifully and eloquently than I'm saying it right now. And she hung up the phone and was crying, and it's hard. It was so hard for her, obviously, to hear me in so much pain. But I hung up with her, and I remember just getting super real with myself. And I totally knew she was right. And I was just laying there, and I just imagined, I guess that there was this feeling of hope that he was going to come rescue me, even though it was not conscious, because I knew he was never coming back and I knew we were never going to reconnect. And I didn't really have any rational expectation that would happen. But I think there was just this irrational part of me, or this part of me that was deeply longing for him to, come in and be there for me, because he was the person who was always there for me in the past. And so suddenly I just had this vision of like, oh, like he may never come around, and I could be laying here forever, wasting my life away. And it just was this wake up call for me that nobody else is coming to save you. This is all on you. If you want to live a certain life, if you want to show up, if you want to really be here fully, then you got to be in it. You got to like show up and really do it. And it wasn't like this pep talk of, okay, buckle up and get back to your life. It was more of like, okay, show up to do the work. The work isn't lying in bed and wishing I didn't feel the way that I felt. The work is allowing yourself to feel it. It's, for me, it was showing up for breath work. It was like laying down and breathing and facing into my pain and facing into my fear and seeing the truth and healing and continuing to show up to heal over and over and over again, no matter how painful it was. It was committing to that. And so that moment of my mom being like, you got to do this for you. I kind of woke up to it and I started to show up and do the work. And that was the start of my healing. That was, moving through the beginning stages of grief and shock and fighting myself to finally surrendering to like what it really means to heal. And then from there, the healing process is rough. It was not, I wish it was like a montage from a video. It would feel way fast. It's long and it's a bunch of ups and downs. And during that time, particularly, I would have moments of, which is really incredible too, having these moments of deep insight into the truth of who I am and really feeling and experiencing and knowing that everything is going to be okay. Everything is fine. And actually, this is happening for you. It's not happening to you. You're not a victim. This is the best thing that's happening to you. And having all of these insights, were so liberating and empowering. And then sometimes moments later or the next day, I would be right back into that depression or hopelessness. And that felt sometimes even worse because I had just had that moment of feeling like on top of the world, of feeling so connected to my truth. And then it felt like, it was just gone. And then there's like this kind of victim mentality that comes in, like, oh, it was taken away from me. During that time, I was on Instagram and I found this graphic, which I'll have to find and maybe put it in the show notes, of who created the graphic. I can't recall off the top of my head. But it was this really cute illustration, like a pink background, and there were all these flowers in a chart, like a kind of like a heart monitor chart. I don't know how it's probably just more of a graph, I guess, where it's like ups and downs, up and down. You go really high up and then further down and then high up and then down and back and forth. And then it said, healing is not linear. And I saved that image and would look at it all the time whenever I would fall back into, those feelings. It feels like you're regressing. It feels like, all of the hard work you put in isn't actually working when you're in the moments where you don't feel good. And that's not the truth. The truth is that the healing process is ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. And, in the ups and downs, you actually are overall moving forward. You're moving up. You're healing. You're becoming more whole. You're filling the cracks. You're healing those fractures in your soul. So I think maybe this will be a decent place to kind of start to wrap up. But if you're grieving right now, my best advice for you would be to really surrender to the feelings, to make space for as many tears to come out as need to allow yourself to even cry, in places that don't necessarily feel appropriate. I cried on yoga mats probably every practice. I don't know if anybody ever saw me, but in, the movement of my body and the silence, I really would purge a lot. And allow yourself to really be vulnerable. Allow yourself to be vulnerable with people in your life. Share the pain that you're going through. You will find that there are other people who have experienced the same things that you're going through, and having that connection is everything. I just wanted to be connected to people who understood grief, who were either going through it themselves or who had been through it, that I could talk to and find, hope and inspiration, that this person sitting in front of me is so happy in their life right now, but they've gone through something, maybe even more traumatic than I've gone through, and acknowledge that, this is not forever. This moment, a girlfriend of mine that I had just met right after I was going through this was saying she had a really tragic breakup a couple years earlier. And she said a friend had reminded her that this is just for now. And that was a lifesaver for me a lot of times, reminding myself this is just for now. And so it is if you allow yourself to really be with it. If you push your pain away, if you try to force yourself, like I can't stand that whole busying up thing, like I'm going to stay really busy and avoid all of my pain and all of my grief and all of the stuff that's going on. That's actually the worst thing you could ever do for yourself, because it doesn't leave you. It's still a part of you. It's a part of your body. It's a part of your energy system. It's still driving you, that pain. And so, you're doing it because you're afraid, but then you're living from fear. So what's going to happen in your next relationships? What's going to happen in all the choices that you are going to make moving forward? You're going to be living from fear. So for me, I knew that I'm not interested in that at all. And it took a little bit to get there and to recognize that, okay, I need to really just be with this. But once you commit to yourself, once you recognize, like, I want something so much more for my life. And a big motivator for me was, who I am in this world. Like, I want to step up. I want to really heal myself. I want to really be brave enough to face into this pain and face into all of this fear. And I want to learn so much more about myself, because I was trusting that this experience was happening for a reason. And then also, I wanted to show up for my future partner who I haven't met yet. So I really want to have an incredible, amazing relationship, something so much better than maybe I can even imagine. And I know that for me to do that, it means that I have to face into this stuff, because I can't be driven from that fear again. So leaving you just with just that little tidbit of being with it, being with the pain. Trying not to suffer so much means that you surrender to your experience and you just really allow yourself to be with it, and you just love the shit out of yourself through it. You just hug yourself and let yourself off the hook for anything that you feel like you need to be doing. Stop trying to make yourself be in a different place than you are. Release the judgment of that and just surrender to exactly where you are. And you'll notice that as you do that, you're going to shift, you're going to heal, and your relationship to who you are is going to begin to transform. The healing process is really powerful and really magical, and also really human and really difficult at times. And so just be patient with it. If you need any support, going through this kind of grief, feel free to reach out to me. I do have a couple of offerings around heartbreak healing, which you'll find in the show notes as well. So I know this isn't the most uplifting topic, but it's really important. I really feel like talking about grief and understanding grief and learning to heal ourselves is some of the most important work that we can do while we're here. So if you're going through it, just know I'm sending you lots of love. It's going to get better. This is just for now. See you next time.